Rocket Radio presents The Trial of the Bonfireboys, a dramatic reconstruction of the events which followed Bonfire Night 1906. But before we begin, let's set the scene in place and time. Bonfire Night that year was certainly less rowdy than some of the riots and pitched battles which took place at regular intervals in the streets of Lewes throughout the 19th century. But the desire of the authorities to impose order on the supporters of the bonfire societies remained strong. To this effect, large detachments of police from Brighton were drafted into the town in an attempt to curb what some saw as the excesses of the bonfire boys. Though some of what you're about to hear may appear remarkably familiar, the world in 1906 seems further away than the fringes of living memory. The Liberal Party won the election of that year by a landslide, with the Labour Party standing under that name for the first time and winning 29 seats. Mr. Winston Churchill was the new Under-Secretary of State for the Colonies. A census revealed that the British Empire ruled 1/5 of the world's population. King Edward VII had been on the throne for 5 years. The Great War, which was to sweep away half a generation of young men, was still 8 years away. On a more familiar note, Liverpool had won the Football League Championship and Everton the FA Cup. 6 weeks before November the 5th, the first aeroplane flight in Europe took place. And 6 weeks after, a Canadian achieved the first transmission of voice by the new technology of radio. So imagine, if you will, the year is 1906, the whiff of burning torches and gunpowder still lingers in the air as the people of Lewes, in the county town of East Sussex, await the trial of the Bonfire Boys.
He's innocent, I'll tell you.
It's Tuesday, November the 6th, and outside the police court in Lewes there's an atmosphere of great excitement as large crowds have gathered to hear what's already being called locally the trial of the Bonfire Boys. The courtroom is packed, and those who can't get in are waiting outside for the verdict. But within, the first proceedings of the morning are almost over. 13 lesser offences are being heard, all in connection with fireworks. The last of the 13 is perhaps the most bizarre alleged offence of them all. The magistrate's chairman is Mr. C.R. Kemp.
Pray silence in court, please. Would Mr. Elias Harris, of no fixed abode, please take the witness stand? Mr. Harris, you are charged with the making of a bonfire in the street by placing one torch on top of another alongside a candle. Do you have anything to say in your defence?
Well, my lad, sir, Your Honour, I don't know nothing about candle. All what I did was to chuck down my torch when it got too hot to handle.
P.C. Bond of the Brighton Police Force, you were the arresting officer. Would you please describe to the court what you saw?
Well, Your Worship, there was definitely a pile of torches, I would say definitely 3, and beside them a burning candle.
And in what state of inflagration were the said torches?
Burning, sir. Definitely burning, as was the candle.
Ooh, burning!
Mr. Harris, you say you threw down one torch. You say it was a hot torch, but was it a burning torch?
Well, no, my lad, Your Honour, sir. It wasn't exactly what you'd call burning, more like smouldering.
Ooh, smouldering.
But when they get to that stage, they sort of smoulder down the stick light and get hot, which is when you chuck them down.
Ah, I see. So your torch was a smouldering torch. And what about the other 2 torches?
Don't know nothing about them, sir. But I expect they'd be smouldering too. That's when you chuck them down, see?
3 torches, possibly smouldering torches, and a burning candle, you say? Well, that doesn't sound like a very large conflagration. Might I call upon Mr. Drake, the Justice's clerk, to tell us in law what he considers does constitute a bonfire?
Your Worships, I can confirm that by law, 3 torches and a candle, a lighted candle, does indeed constitute a bonfire.
Rubbish!
Very well. Will you please place silence in court? Silence in court. May I remind the bench that as well as this case of 3 torches and a burning candle, you also have to consider the previous 12 actions we've heard this morning in connection with fireworks. So would you now confer and consider your verdicts?
The merriment amongst the onlookers continues as the bench adjourn briefly to consider their verdicts. They then pass their rulings to the chairman.
Please be silent while I read the verdicts. It is the considered opinion of my colleagues on the bench that in all cases the defendants have been found guilty of firework offences, except the case of Elias Harris, who has been acquitted of causing an offence with 3 torches, burning or smouldering, and 1 candle.
Court adjourned till 2:45 this afternoon.
Now is the time for marching. Now let your hearts be gay. Up to the merry bugles sounding along our way. So let your voices ring, my boys, and take the time from me, and I'll sing you a song as we march along of Sussex by the sea.
It's now just after 2:45 on the afternoon of Tuesday, November the 6th, 1906, and the so-called trial of the Bonfireboys, the main event at the Lewes Police Court, has just begun. The atmosphere in the court this afternoon is even more boisterous than this morning for what's now been dubbed the 3 torches and a candle trial. The prosecution is being conducted by Mr. Lawson Lewis. The defendants are William Thomas Gearing and his son Thomas Ernest Gearing, along with Eli Daw and Harold Weston, all of Lewes, who are charged with taking part in an unlawful assembly in Commercial Square on the night of the 5th. Mr. Lawson Lewis opens for the prosecution.
I shall now define precisely what is meant by unlawful assembly. An unlawful assembly is defined as being an attempt to carry out any common purpose, whether lawful or unlawful, in such a manner as to give persons reasons to fear a disturbance of the peace. I would also like to point out that this sort of behaviour will not be tolerated on the 5th, and I hope that in future people will assist the police in suppressing these illegal practices. It is paramount that the police must maintain law and order, and I'm sure that one can rely on the people of Lewes to accept this condition of things. Quiet, please.
Will you please place silence in court?
Bearing all that in mind, I shall now outline those events that took place on the last procession of the combined Commercial Square and Borough Bonfire Societies. As the combined Commercial Square and Borough Bonfire Societies processions arrived in Commercial Square, many of those participating marched round to form a large circle. Then, at a preconcerted signal, members threw the torches they were holding into the middle. This resulted in a bonfire upon the highway. This, I would like to point out, constitutes an unlawful act, according to the statute under which the complaints have been lodged. The police subsequently took action by attempting to extinguish the fire by kicking it into pieces. However, they were impeded from doing so by many members of the crowd whose behaviour had become very violent. I will now call the charging officer, Superintendent Waghorn, into the witness stand. Superintendent Waghorn, would you please describe to the court the state of this bonfire that your men tried to extinguish?
Your Worship, I would describe the ensuing bonfire as tremendous. And indeed, I am sure that anyone might be able to see where this fire had been for many days afterwards. Furthermore, my officers were hindered in their attempts to extinguish the said bonfire by the crowd, who pushed them from one place to another. I would further add, Your Honour, that it was a very yelling and disorderly crowd indeed.
Superintendent Waghorn, you say they were a yelling crowd. Were you able to discern anything in particular they were yelling?
Oh, yes, indeed, sir. I distinctly heard shouts of, "Chuck them in!" and "Burn them!" which yells I took to be addressed to my officers. It was shortly after that I arrested the first of the defendants, Eli Dorr, who had been a participant in making the bonfire. However, while trying to return the prisoner to the police station, I was struck from behind, in the back, with some kind of wooden instrument, which felled me and left me injured on the ground and in need of medical attention. I duly lost hold of Dawes, and other officers proceeded to my assistance, and the accused was duly escorted to the police station.
Thank you, Superintendent Waghorn. I now call Superintendent Stevens, the Deputy Chief Constable of Brighton Police. Superintendent Stevens, you were the arresting officer of another of the four accused, Harold Weston. Would you please describe to the court the event which led up to his arrest?
Your Worship, I had already observed Weston in the crowd. He was unmistakable, sir, as he was clothed in the attire of a Bengal lancer. He appeared to be brandishing a pole above his head in an aggressive manner. He then proceeded to attack every police officer who came within his reach, indeed injuring myself in the process. Shortly after that, and only due to being overcome by the sheer weight of police officers, was he apprehended and taken to join Dorr in the cells.
Your Worship, it is my belief that on the evidence submitted by members of the Brighton Constabulary, the defendants should be committed to the assizes to take their trial.
Far over the seas we wander, wide through the world we roam.
The defence has pointed out that their clients, Mr Weston and Mr Dorr, are respectable men of good character. 2 more police officers were called to the stand, and the bench then adjourned until Friday morning at 10 o'clock, the defendants being bound over in the sum of £5 to attend at that hour.
To the girl so kind that we left behind in Sussex by the sea, for we're the men from Sussex.
The trial has now reconvened, once again to a packed and boisterous public gallery. It's almost as if the good folk of Lewes see this as some sort of enormous joke, some entertainment put on especially for their curious fun. The objects of abuse and ribald laughter are very much the Brighton police, who are seen as incomers who made matters worse, not better, on the night of the 5th. Mr Grantham for the defence rises to read a statement on behalf of his clients.
Your Worship, on behalf of my clients, I would like to express regret at the treatment afforded the police officers in court on Tuesday. I would like to explain that my clients, and particularly their supporters, were excited and did not know any better. I sincerely hope that this kind of behaviour will not occur again, and that this action will not count against my clients.
Very well, Mr. Grantham. Your sentiments have been noted.
Thank you, sir. I now call P.C. Neal of Brighton to the witness box.
Please place silence in court.
P.C. Neal, would you please describe to the court what you witnessed on the night of the 5th in Commercial Square?
As has been already described by my colleagues, I witnessed the scenes of disorderly torch throwing in Commercial Square on the said night of the 5th of November. I would further like to add that it came to my attention that William Thomas Gearing and his son, Thomas Ernest Gearing, were also eager participants and prominent in throwing of torches. I warned Gearing Sr. to stop or I would arrest him. However, Gearing would not desist in this action and I therefore arrested him and escorted him to the station. The police station, that is. On proceeding to the said police station, Gearing Senior resisted my arrest, and I myself was submitted to several severe claps to my head and a kick in the leg, which felled me to the ground.
PC Neal, may I ask, have you been to the Lewis bonfire celebrations before the night in question?
No, sir, I have not.
May I ask if you were at all surprised by what you saw?
Well, yes, sir, I was. I thought it would all be a bit of fun. But there was something like 700 persons in the commercial square at the time of these said disturbances. Several of them I noted to be ladies.
Ladies? What sort of ladies?
Silence in court.
Ladies who was frightened and wanted to get away.
And who exactly were these ladies?
I'm sorry, sir, I couldn't exactly say.
Thank you, PC Neal. I now call PC Ticehurst, also of the Brighton Constabulary, to the witness box. Please describe to the court what you saw in Commercial Square on the evening of the 5th.
Sir, I would like to add to what my colleague has just said, with which I corroborate that I also saw Gearing Jr. kick the torches what the police had been able to withdraw from the bonfire back into this inferno. I warned Gearing Jr. I would arrest him if he did not stop this kicking of torches, but he would not desist. So I arrested him and took him to the station. Police, not train, obviously, sir.
Thank you, PC Ticehurst. Next, I call PC Baker, also from the Brighton force, to the witness stand.
Thank you, sir. I'd like to agree with what my colleagues described and to add that I was one of the officers helping to escort Daw to the station. Police, not train.
Yes, PC Baker. I think we can all safely assume that as arresting police officers, your destination with the accused would be the police and not the train station.
Sorry, sir. As I was saying, I was helping to take Daw to the station, and in so doing I was kicked by the aforesaid. Dawes, that is.
PC Baker, let me ask you, did you take this kick to be intentional or accidental? After all, there were a lot of people around at the time. It must have been quite a melee.
A what, sir?
A melee, PC Baker. A melee. A boisterous, jostling crowd.
Oh, yes, sir. Sorry, sir. Yes, not a word I've come across before, sir. No, there was definitely a very big melee, sir. A very big melee indeed.
Well, PC Baker, now that you have added that word to your vocabulary, perhaps you could answer my question. In this large melee, did you take the kick to be intentional or accidental?
Oh, sorry, sir. No, sir. I could not say whether it were an intentional or an accidental kick, but it was certainly an hard kick.
And let me ask you, PC Baker, were you aware of this alleged preconcerted signal spoken of earlier by the prosecution?
No, sir. No, I'll have to say I wasn't.
Despite being in very close proximity to Superintendents Waghorn and Stevens at the time of the alleged signal?
Close to what, sir?
Close proximity, Baker. Proximity. Standing near to, next to, alongside.
I'm sorry, sir. I'm not used to these long words, sir. I didn't have much of an education, sir, really. But yes, sir, I was very close by the superintendents. Very close proximity, sir.
PC Baker, let me also put it to you that it's been suggested that if no Brighton police had been in Lewes on the night of the 5th, police who, like yourself, are unacquainted with the bonfire celebrations, there would have been no breach of the peace.
Absolutely right.
Well, were you aware of this suggestion?
Well, yes, sir. I had heard such a rumour put about, but it were only a rumour.
Thank you very much, PC Baker. You may be uneducated, but at least I think we can say that you are honest. You may stand down. I now call Mr. Edgar Flint of Western Road, Lewes, to enter the witness box. Mr. Flint, would you describe to the court your connection with Lewes Bonfire?
Well, my lad, I have been actively involved in committee work for the Bonfire Societies for many years, am currently the Honorary Secretary and the Honorary Treasurer of the combined Commercial Square and Borough Bonfire Societies.
So, as such, Mr. Flint, I'm sure that you would know, if anyone does, about an alleged preconcerted signal suggested by my colleague Mr. Lawson Lewis to throw the lighted torches into the middle of their circle and thus create a bonfire. Do you know of any such preconcerted signal?
No, sir. I know of no such signal to have been arranged for the throwing of torches. Not this year, nor any other year for that matter.
Quite right.
Thank you, Mr. Flint. I now call upon the first of my clients to take the witness box, Mr. William Thomas Gearing. Mr. Gearing, would you like to explain to the court your involvement with the Bonfire Society and the events that took place on the night of the 5th in Commercial Square?
Well, sir, I've been involved with Bonfire Society for well on 50 years now. I first joined Commercial Square Bonfire Society in 1856 and later joined the Borough Society. I had the very great honour to have been appointed the Archbishop of Borough Society and very proud to say that I've held that position for 32 years. 32 years out of 50, I reckon, is not bad going, sir.
Very good indeed, Mr. Gearing. Now would you please describe what, in your opinion, took place on the night of the 5th?
Well, sir, first of all, I would like to say that during the whole of that evening, I only threw one torch away, and that were before 7:30, because it'd been soaked in too much paraffin.
And what effect might this over-soaking have had?
Well, it made it quite dangerous, sir. The wooden handle was soaked, you see, and it was lighting up, which isn't what you want at all. So I threw it away safely. But after 11:30, when we gathered in Commercial Square, I had no torch. No torch at all, sir. But others had, as is customary, and also has been a long tradition, them as what lit torches dispose of them. Only about 50 or so, certainly no more than 60. It's what we do every year in a sort of controlled fire, and they burn themselves out. But what happens was the police, the Brighton police, sir, what don't know the ways on bonfire, rushed in and started to kick them out, which in itself can be quite dangerous. In fact, one of the burning torches landed on my foot while I kicked it away, and indeed another landed under a lady's skirt, and I immediately went to her aid and raked it away. Otherwise, who knows what might have happened, sir? And then I was suddenly jumped on by about a dozen or so officers and kicked to the ground.
So, Mr. Gearing, you're maintaining that you had nothing whatsoever to do with the starting of the bonfire in Commercial Square, and in fact it's true to say that you did your best to alleviate the circumstances as you saw them getting out of control.
That's quite correct, sir. In fact, I had no idea if I was intended. And when I saw men throwing torches down, I shouted to them to hold them up, because I was anxious that the Bonfire Boys should preserve their good name. And I would like to add, sir, that in my opinion, the crowd was not at all disorderly. In fact, I've seen far worse at political meetings.
Please stay silent in court.
Thank you, Mr. Gearing. You may stand down. I now call your son, Mr. Gearing Jr., to the witness box. Mr. Gearing, would you kindly explain to the court your part in the proceedings after 11:30 in Commercial Square on the night of the 5th?
Well, sir, this year I didn't take part in much of bonfire, having had a bit of an upset stomach. I think it was some bad ale I'd drunk the evening before. It was Red Queen, sir.
Red Queen? Bloody awful.
Hadn't tried it before, sir, and won't ever again. Knew I should have stuck to the Harveys, sir. So I suppose it served me right, sir. Went right through me, sir, it did.
Yes, Mr. Gearing. I don't think we need to go into that.
No, sir. Sorry, sir. But it was just by way of explaining that by about 11:30 the after effects had somewhat worn off, and I felt it safe to venture into the town without being caught short, if you understand my drift, sir. That ale can go right through you if it's a bit off, like. Clean you out quicker than a dose of salt, sir.
A point taken, Mr. Gearing. I shall steer clear of the Red Queen.
Your Worship, I believe that neither I nor this court is interested in the internal workings of the accused, nor is the Red Queen on trial. Could he please perhaps keep to the point?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Lewis. Mr. Gearing, could you please lay off the Red Queen and your stomach and continue with your account of what happened in Commercial Square on the night of the 5th?
Sorry, Your Worship, my lord, sir, but it was just by way of explaining that when I did venture out, I did go up the commercial square along with my lady wife, and I certainly had no torch. She's not so keen, you see. But I did see my dad knocked down, and he's not in his first flush, sir. So I rushed over to help him up, having to leave my wife, which I was loath to do as she gets a bit jittery, her nerves, you see. But I didn't know that at that point Dad was under arrest. Not that it would have made much difference, him being quite old-like. But as I went to help him up, PC Neil smashed me right in the face with his fist and put me under arrest too. But I did not touch those torches in any way. As I said, I'm under strict instructions not to when the wife's around, and it's a deliberate lie of PC Neil's to say that I did.
And, Mr. Gearing, in your opinion, what was the state of the alleged bonfire?
Well, certainly not what I'd call a fire at all, sir. And I've seen a good few what I'd call proper bonfires in my time, what with Dad being Archbishop and all.
So, how would you describe the fire?
Well, I'd say it was what you might call a spent fire. Not a fire at all, really. Certainly not a bonfire. More a collection of half-burnt, smouldering torches, sir. In fact, I'd go so far to say that it would be an insult to a proper fire to call it so.
Thank you, Mr. Gearing. That will be all. I'd now like to call your wife, Mrs. Gearing, to the witness box. Mrs. Gearing, as someone who we gather is not at all keen on fires and conflagrations and burning torches, how would you describe the fire?
Like my husband says, I don't like fires, and I don't like him playing with fire. But of course, you can't stop them, can you? Certainly not on bonfire. Can't spoil all their fun. So long as I'm not there to see it. But like I was that night, on account of his upset stomach. I like to look after my husband, see.
Quite, Mrs. Gearing. You're obviously a very conscientious wife. But leaving aside the state of your husband's bowels, if we may, what was the state of the bonfire? Was it what you, afeard of fire as you are, was it what you would describe as a large conflagration?
Oh, well, sir, like my husband said, hardly fit to be called a bonfire at all. And if you ask my opinion, it was them police officers causing more harm, kicking all them half-burning torches all over the place. If it hadn't been for Dad-in-law raking it out from under that poor woman's skirt, heaven knows what would have become of her. I was just thanking my lucky stars it wasn't my skirt what it had gone up.
Please pay silence in court. You stupid buggers, will you please pay silence in court?
If it please the bench, if I may, I would like to call one final witness for the prosecution who may demonstrate that burning torches and ladies' skirts are no laughing matter. A very important witness whom I've only just managed to track down.
Ooh. Very well, Mr. Lewis.
I now call Miss Fanny Flanders of Brighton, the unfortunate lady whose skirt was nearly set alight by a torch. Miss Flanders, were you in Commercial Square, Lewis, on the night in question?
I was indeed, sir.
And had you been in Lewis before on bonfire night?
No, sir. We didn't have anything like that where I come from. I lived on a farm before I was forced to move south in order to support me family by any means I could, sir.
Aww. Very well, very well. So why did you come to Lewis on that night?
Well, sir, me and me girlfriends, we find big crowds are good for business, as you might say, sir. Like at the races, sir. I'm sure you've been there yourself, sir. Fine looking gentlemen like you.
Oh, Betty
has. Returning to the matter at issue, did you know anyone in the crowd at Commercial Square?
Not in the crowd, sir, no. But I knew quite a few of the Brighton police, sir. Most of them having arrested me at one time or another. And one or two of them having become quite close acquaintances, sir.
That's quite enough, Miss Flanders. You're before the court to describe what you felt and what you feared when matters got out of hand in Commercial Square. What was your first reaction when you realised someone had kicked a burning torch under your skirts?
I shouted, "Oh, no, sir!" Just like that. "Oh, no!"
Oh, no!
And what did you fear might happen?
That I'd catch fire and be burned up in a flash, sir. I'm not a wicked girl, really, sir, and I don't deserve an end like that with me poor family left with no one to support them.
Aww. Very well, very well.
And I had me best flounces and petties on that night. hoping for a bit of business, like. But then a kindly old gentleman rushed to me aid, sir, and kicked the torch away. It hadn't been kicked there in the first place by one of the Brighton bobbies. But no sooner had he saved me, sir, than he was set upon by the police and beaten, sir. A bleeding shame, I call it. That old gentleman deserves my thanks, sir, and he shall get it too if he cares to ask me after.
Thank you, Miss Flanders. All I was asking was whether the bonfire in the square was a large one, which you appeared, so I thought to think it was.
Oh, no, sir. Not that big, I thought. But now I realise, since talking to you late last night, sir, that really I was mistaken and it was out of control and dangerous. Have I done all right, sir?
That is quite enough, Miss Flanders. Please stand down.
Court adjourned.
It is now Saturday morning, and for the third day the trial of the Bonfireboys, as it's become both locally and now nationally known, continues. Mr. Grantham for the defence is questioning his remaining two clients, the so-called Bonfireboys, Eli Daw and Harold Weston, both of Lewes.
I call my client Mr. Eli Daw. Mr. Daw, can you explain your part in the events of the night of the 5th?
Yes, sir. I'm a member of the Commercial and Borough Amalgamated Societies. On bonfire night after 11:30, I was on my way up to Commercial Square, and as is customary, I had placed my burning torch into a receptacle which had been provided for this purpose at the Elephant and Castle Hotel. That would be at 11:30. I then went up to the square, where I will have to say I saw the police, the Brighton police, behaving in a very, very silly manner, kicking burning torches about all over the place. I was a bit worried about this, and then I saw a young boy with a torch, and I took it off him and threw it to the floor. He was only a little boy, and I did it for his safety. The next thing I know, the copper came up and arrested me and took me down the neck.
Thank you, Mr. Daw. I now call to the witness box Mr. Harold Weston. Mr. Weston, would you now please explain to the court your part in the events of the night of the 5th? Am I not mistaken in thinking that you are the accused who was described as being dressed as a Bengal lancer?
Yes, sir. Indeed, I had on this occasion, as on many in the past, donned my costume as a Bengal lancer. My great-grandfather, you see, had employed Bengal lancers when in the Indian Army, and so I felt it not inappropriate to wear the costume.
Fair point. But what of your pole? The court has been led to believe that this was used by you in a threatening manner, indeed, to strike police officers on their heads.
Sir, it is true that I was in possession of a pole. No Bengal lancer worth his salt would be seen without one.
Quite right.
However, I would not call it a pole. It is a lance, a traditional lance as used by the eponymous Bengal lancers, and I certainly did not use it to strike officers from the Brighton Constabulary on their helmets. In fact, what happened, sir, was that my lance unfortunately became entangled in one of my puttees. That's the traditional legwear worn by the Bengal lancer, sir, which alas overthrew me, and I ended up in a heap on the ground, lance and puttee all tangled up, sir. When I finally did disentangle myself, puttee from lance, in order to avoid such a mishap again, I held my lance high above my head. The next thing I knew, sir, some out-of-town Brighton bobby arrested me and hustled me in a rather degrading manner, may I say so, sir, to the station police. I would like to add, sir, that it was while being hustled in this inelegant fashion, I heard one constable, Brighton, say to another, "Fix that bastard over there."
Mr. Weston, may I ask you if you know who it was that used such offensive language?
No, not by name, sir, but certainly one of the Brighton police, I think. The East Sussex policeman would not use such language.
And may you tell the court for what offence you were arrested?
Well, sir, as far as I know, initially it was for drunkenness. I think because I was lying on the ground wrestling to extract my lance from my puttee. I admit I may have appeared drunk, although I drink little and in moderation. And in the end, they changed the charge to obstructing the police.
Mr. Weston, thank you very much.
No, thank you, sir.
You may now stand down.
Mr. Lewis for the prosecution now rises to begin his summing up.
May I remind the bench that you are inquiring into a charge of unlawful assembly. I have proved that such a meeting had taken place on a public highway.
Rubbish! Silence in court.
As to the question of motive, this will have to be proved by subsequent events. However, in my opinion, and as you have heard, there is ample evidence to show that the people congregated in Commercial Square did constitute an unlawful assembly and that the 4 defendants were party to it.
And now Mr. Grantham for the defence is rising to address the bench.
Your Worship, it is my opinion that it has in no way been proved that an unlawful meeting took place on the night of the 5th in Commercial Square. My colleague, Mr. Lawson Lewis, has laid down a very broad proposition of the law. But to make a fire on the highway is in itself not an illegal act, and it does not necessarily follow that by throwing a torch onto the highway is either a breach of the Highways Act or of the Town Police Clauses Act. The definition of unlawful assembly is a judge-made law and not a statutory offence. The evidence which has been submitted is contradictory in the extreme, and it is inconceivable that any jury would convict my clients of such an offence. I think that when you review the evidence adduced against my clients and compare it with that submitted for the offence, I think you might find that it is possible that the police, the Brighton police, have been mistaken.
Down up, Stuff their torches right where you can't see them.
Oh, Sussex, Sussex by the sea. Good old Sussex by the sea. You may tell them all that we stand no more for Sussex by the sea.
The magistrates have returned from considering their verdict, and the chairman, Mr. C.R. Kemp, rises to give the result of their determinations. For once, there is a hushed and very pregnant silence in the court.
We have come to the unanimous conclusion that some of the crowd are indeed guilty of unlawful behaviour. However, on the basis of the evidence that has been submitted before us over the past week, in the view of the bench, this evidence we consider is not sufficient to send the case for trial. The case against the 4 defendants, the 4 Bonfire Boys, will therefore be dismissed.
In the trial of the Bonfire Boys, the part of the magistrates' chairman, Mr. C.R. Kemp, was played by Lord Dennis Healy. The justice's clerk, Mr. Drake, Andy Thomas. For the prosecution, the part of Mr. Lawson Lewis was played by Derek Watts, Superintendent Waghorn, Tim Ash, Superintendent Stevens, Martin Leeburn, P.C. Neal, Mike Collins, P.C. Ticehurst, Arthur Smith, P.C. Baker, Professor Laurie Taylor, P.C. Bond, Tim Ash. For the defence, Mr. W.W. Grantham was played by Peter Donaldson, Elias Harris, Phil Flowers, William Thomas Gearing, Paul Wheeler. His son, Thomas Ernest Gearing, was played by Mark Moose Jarvis. Eli Dorr, Martin Leeburn, Harold Weston, John Peel, Edgar Flint, Andy McBean, Mrs. Gearing, Dawn Darcy, and Fanny Flanders, Felicity Finch. Other parts were played by members of the cast, and the occasional raspberry was courtesy of Lord Healy. The opening and closing announcements were read by me, Brian Perkins. The narrator was Dilly Barlow, who wrote and produced the play based on an article by Jim Etherington. The Trial of the Bonfire Boys was a Rocket Radio production for Rocket Radio.